This is an incredibly important week in the politics of Zimbabwe. And I'm going to give you some players I want to juxtapose so that you understand the players of the game that are going to be important this week. First, I want to talk about a guy called Tino Machakaire. Tino Machakaire is the head of the ZANU-PF Youth League. A lot of people know him as Teen Mac. Let me tell you what I know about Teen Mac. Teen Mac didn't get into politics because he wanted to. In fact, he didn't want to get into politics. Of all of President Emerson Mnangagwa's appointments into the Politburo, Tino being appointed as the leader of the Youth League, I want to say I do think that this was an incredibly good decision by the president. But this is a very important week for Tino Machakaire because he has a job to deliver the Youth League in the campaign of this mandate that is being sought at the ZANU-PF conference. Let me go a little bit deeper about this guy. And I say this with my name on it. Tino Machakaire is not a thief. He's not a thief. And no matter how many times you try to spin it, no matter how many times you try to play it, Tino is genuinely self-made. The guy was a millionaire at a younger age than almost every politician I know in Zimbabwe. Now, he is a close friend, almost like a young brother to Takwire. But the president was not wrong about Tino and was not wrong about the appointment. But this is the week he is going to be tested whether or not he is worth the salt. If Tino makes it past the conference, my God, his political future is beyond bright. Okay? Second person I'm going to talk about today is the vice president, who has just released a copy of this dossier, or rather, a copy of this dossier has just been released. Can you imagine a situation where the vice president, the sitting vice president of a country, informs the president that you have a treasonous group around you and the president does nothing about it? This is going to be a problematic week for him or a good week for him. But at the epicenter of what's taking place this week is also Jacob Mudenda, who I am going to go a little bit deeper on. Jacob Mudenda, to me, is the manifestation of the genius of Mnangagwa's strategy. Mudenda is the guy who controls parliament and makes sure parliament has got discipline. Now he's been appointed Secretary General of ZANU-PF, which means his job in ZANU-PF is to ensure that the discipline in the party follows to the discipline in parliament. He is not only the most capable, but he is also the most willing of the people you could have thought of. Jacob Mudenda, to me, is going to get the job done. I guarantee you that. He's going to get the job done. Now, so I've given you Tino, I've given you the vice president, I've given you Jacob Mudenda. The Mnangagwa brilliance for me, the Mnangagwa brilliance is that he has people who are going to get the job done, that needs to get done in the positions that can get the job done. But there are problems within that I want to break down, okay? So let's go to the dossier by the vice president that talks about the $1 billion quartet, the $3.2 billion question that he raises. He introduces financial puppet masters who he says are behind the constitutional theater. In modern African politics, constitutional change requires more than legal arguments. It requires cold, hard cash. He mentions Wikino Chivayo, the flashy emperor of government contracts, who somehow transformed a failed solar project into political financing empire. Chivayo gave ZANU-PF provincial chairman, every ZANU-PF provincial chair, $100,000 cash and a new Land Cruiser. Value of all of that, $3 million. And the argument that is putting forward is that Wikino defrauded ZEC, and then he stole from state. The audacity is breathtaking. Use those funds to cover fund ZANU-PF. Okay. Next guy he introduces in the dossier is Kudakwashi Takwire. Pretty big week for him too. Chiwenga's dossier says that ZANU-PF owns 45% of Secunda Holdings through CBZ, through a nominee called Mfuto Investments. But he says the party never received a single cent. Think about that for a moment. So he says Takwire is using ZANU-PF own money that belongs to the party, to capture the very party structures that own the company, like sophisticated financial incest. Then he introduces Scott Sakupwanya, the golden boy who controls 17 plus tons of Zimbabwe's diamonds. He says there's a $1.9 billion leakage that came out of Scott through what Chiwenga defines as a toll gate fraud, disguised as a gold incentive scheme. Then there's Delish. I like Delish. I know Delish pretty well. In fact, Delish is defined by Chiwenga as the waste management kingpin, who he says allegedly inflated government contracts by over $200 million. And of course, we know that President Mnangagwa has come out before and defended Delish as his friend. Chiwenga is very frustrated. And I get him, okay? He is very frustrated because, and his story is there's $3.2 billion that has been stolen by these guys, and we're not doing anything about it. Okay? So, this is not the first time we're hearing about Chiwenga wanting to address these four guys. No, is it the second time? He has tried a couple of times now. And it's testament to how powerless Chiwenga now is. And I am going to break that down for you. Chiwenga's seriously big problem, is that he came into prominence and power with one job, and the job was to remove the criminals that were surrounding the president. But then COVID hit and the Restore Legacy core was broken, the core of Parents Shiri, SB Moyo, many of them passing away, just to mention a few. And this created a void. The drivers of Restore Legacy are no longer there. And the failure to remove the criminals around the president has now made it a new day of new criminals, or even the same criminals who are still around the presidency. Because the thing with the criminals is they're very good at accessing State House and taking charge of State House in the claim. So I can only imagine you get the Politburo, and geez, they might be like, it must be such a quiet astonishment as the Politburo listens to the vice president of the country, who was once the most powerful military figure, telling the Politburo that the president's closest business associates are criminals. Look, the October extension of the president's term is a done deal. We have seen provinces come out and endorse Grace Mugabe before. It's such theater to me when I hear about the provinces. The type of leadership you see in ZANU-PF provinces today provides perfect environment for anyone who wants to manipulate the system through bribery, and the president might never get to see that because it happens too low beneath. If you have a provincial chairperson who receives $100,000 in cash, who receives a new car, what is their reason for not bowing down to the money? And the biggest problem Chiwenga has when it comes to the issue of provinces is the very province that he comes from himself. This is why I was talking about Tino Machakaire. General Chiwenga would need incredible political push, at the very least, incredible political support from his own province in order for him to push an agenda. The problem with the provinces comes from is it is also the province that TNMAC comes from, and TNMAC runs that province. I don't see where the political base or political support of the general is going to come from. And the problem of 2017 is that ZANU-PF never cleaned up the party. So what you have is a lot of people who are in positions in ZANU-PF that were never elected to get into those positions. In fact, they got into those positions using the same standard operating procedure that Chiwenga is now verifying to have created a rot all the way up to the top. Okay? I also want to talk about Obam Chinguri. For me, Obam Chinguri is such an important kingmaker, especially when you talk about Manicaland politics. Let me tell you this about Obam Chinguri. Restore Legacy doesn't happen without her. I can say this with absolute authority that the ED presidential launch does not happen without Opa, without Chris Mchangwa, without Obet Mpofu. Those were the players that got ED past the finish line. But here's what people do not talk about enough when it comes to Obam Chinguri. She was actually supposed to be vice president. In the very last minute, the general maneuvered and she lost the chance. So if it's a question of loyalty, I don't believe she's going to pick loyalties to the vice president. I think her loyalties are to herself, and rightfully so. When the new dispensation came in, Chiwenga was both vice president of the country, but he was also the minister of defense. I'm sure this continues to haunt him now, that before he was removed from the Ministry of Defense and Obam Chinguri was placed in his stead, he could have taken care of all of these issues he's bringing up now. If Chiwenga wanted to win, if Chiwenga is going to win, this narrative is pushing. I don't think he has the political infrastructure to do anything about it. In fact, if he could do anything about it, he would have done so by now. So what's the purpose of bringing the dossier to the Politburo? The purpose of bringing the dossier to the Politburo is because you have no power to do anything about it. For example, if Chiwenga was still the head of the military, she was still the commander of the Zimbabwe Defense Forces. Can you imagine Chiwenga being the commander of the Defense Forces and even needing to write a dossier about this? So either he is scared to act or he cannot act, or he is not scared to act, but he still cannot act. And that's the tragic irony of Chiwenga's position. It's going to become clearer as the week goes. Of course, ED can simply fire General Chiwenga, which would have unbelievable consequences, but it is fully constitutional and it is within his power. Now, I say that to say the same thing I said about the general when he was still in charge of the military. ED must not find himself in a position one day where he wakes up and he thinks, geez, I could have taken care of this guy when I had the power to. Here's what Chiwenga can do to salvage his position. Okay, I actually know how he can salvage his position. The most important area that Chiwenga must continue to focus on is corruption. But the way he must focus on it is he must look at the judges and the courts who have been incredibly compromised by one of the people he's talking about. There is a list of every judge who has been paid off and every car that has been bought for a judge. And that list has been kept by one of the listed people in the dossier. According to the intelligence, along that list is recordings of every meeting, every communication that the judges had with the individual or the judges had with middlemen who were go-betweens of the transactions. And that list exists. And that list is kept by one of the people who is listed in the dossier because that is his security. That is his get out of jail card. So if the general wants this issue and he wants to win this issue, he must do what needs to be done. He must behave exactly how they behave with the one to catch a drug pin. He must allow the small fish to go free and offer amnesty to them. By that, I mean offer amnesty to the judges in exchange for a confession where the judges tell you exactly what they did. I don't believe the president, especially being a lawyer himself, would be able to look past those confessions. If Chiwenga really wants to tread a hard path, and he really does want to win, this will give him a win, not just legally, but it will bring the momentum of the public with it because the public will support this move. Okay? Now, let me address this issue of the extension and the precedence that goes before it. Vladimir Putin in Russia is the Michelangelo of constitutional adjustments. Putin didn't simply extend his own term, he actually reset the constitutional clock to reset it to 0 in 2020, which allows him to run until 2036. The genius lies in the methodical preparation, the legislative choreography, the judicial rubber stamping, and a controlled referendum that yielded a 78% approval anyway. Putin understands that even manufactured legitimacy requires institutional theater. And that's the same thing here. Let's talk about Paul Kagame in Rwanda. The performance-based extension is par excellence in Rwanda. Kagame's constitutional changes followed a petition, which he said was from 3.5 million Rwandans, that critically coincided with 8% average GDP growth between 2001 and 2014. So the country wanted the stability and they didn't see, and they gave him the momentum he needed. The lesson is economic performance can provide legitimacy, or at the very least can provide cover for constitutional adjustments. Then you got Xi Jinping in China, the most audacious move. He simply eliminated presidential term limits entirely in 2018. So President Xi demonstrated that in a non-competitive system, party consensus trumps popular ratification. You don't even need the ratification. But for every one of these success stories, history gives us a cautionary tale. So I want to talk about the cautionary tale of Guinea. They successfully also extended the term limit of President Conde through a referendum, but then he was overthrown by a military coup just months after that. Constitutional legitimacy without genuine popular support creates dangerous political vulnerability. Then you got President Blai in Burkina Faso. His 2014 extension attempt triggered a massive uprising that culminated in an overthrow. Even long-serving leaders can fatally miscalculate public tolerance. And he's a typical example. But I want to talk about the mathematics to make the extension work for President Emerson Mnangagwa. Let's suppose that you had to pay off every member of parliament to get this thing through the parliament. Not only could they not, I don't believe that the MPs in Zimbabwe can afford to not support the president, but the MPs themselves also have interest, right? They also have interest, and they've seen what happens when you go against the president's team. The MPs get funeral cover, they get school fees allowance, they get cars, they get to sleep in hotels all the time. But if you were to give every MP 100,000 US dollars, and you only need 130 MPs to get past the line, that's $13 million. But let's be a bit more ambitious. If you had to give every MP $1 million, that's $130 million. These boys have $130 million. One tender could take care of it. So the 22nd ZANU-PF National People's Conference to me represents a coronation. But of course, I can't go through the day without talking about Geza. This is going to be a week with incredible consequence, not just for Geza, I guess, but for everybody who's vying for the limelight, political limelight. I think Geza might actually get the support that it needs to put on a show. But even if it does, ZANU-PF is going to return that favor and give you a bigger show. And here are the four scenarios that I see taking place. So you have the one scenario where its political drama reaches its climax. And in this scenario, Mudenda successfully orchestrates the parliamentary process. Civil society offers minimal resistance. So Mnangagwa serves until 2030. You have a second scenario where there's an uprising against it. Civil society and opposition parties and dissatisfied ZANU-PF factions mobilize sufficient resistance to block the extension, potentially triggering broader political instability. And I'm conscious of what happened before, but that's scenario number two. Scenario number three is Mnangagwa accept a modified arrangement, step down in 2028 in exchange for post presidential security. Then scenario number four is you have a civil war, which is, I mean, my God, just of course the worst thing everyone wants people to think about. But you have internal ZANU-PF divisions, which intensify, and you now have open warfare, and your guess is as good as mine. Those are the scenarios you're looking at. This is going to be an important week because not everybody can get away with just surviving. Politburo is going to sit today. I can't wait to hear what's going to take place there. But the people to watch, for me, Obama Chinguri is very important to watch because she is the Manicaland Don daughter. She also can be vice president herself, so Chiwenga getting fired works very well for her. You have Chiwenga himself, this Dossier. I cannot imagine a situation where we entirely and completely abandon, disregard, and ignore a sitting vice president telling you that you got treason taking place here. I mean, his basic training when he joined as a cadet is you protect the country against treason. You've got Tino Machakaire, who to me is the blue-eyed boy of Kuda. And he is going to pull this off. I have absolutely no doubt. You've got Jacob Mudenda, who is now the chief disciplinarian of ZANU-PF, whose singular task is to make sure that the relay, once you go past the conference, you go straight to parliament and the job gets done. I also think he is going to have a good week. And then, of course, you have Geza, who is calling for October the 17th street protest, which I'm inclined to now think it might start to get some momentum because it's got some radical sympathizers, especially with what happened today and what might happen in Politburo in a couple of hours' time. So Geza might actually have a good week. I don't think it's going to matter because right afterwards, I think ZANU-PF is going to come and do a solidarity version of the same thing, where they'll be 10 times bigger, just to show you that their numbers matter more. But yeah, what a Monday in politics. The week has started off hot. But yeah, until next time, head back.